Securities offered through Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through CWM, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC is under separate ownership from any other named entity. Carson Partners, a division of CWM, LLC, is a nationwide partnership of advisors. This is The Way to Wealth, with host Scott Ford, a jiu-jitsu fighting, woodworking, beekeeping entrepreneur who is also the managing director, partner, and wealth advisor of Carson Wealth. Financial freedom is the goal, and clarity and simplicity is how we'll get there. Let's get to it. This is Way to Wealth.
Hello, and welcome back to the Way to Wealth podcast, where we're all about making money simple, allowing you to live fully and live fully today, now, not 30 years from today. Really excited this week. I have a friend of mine, John Ruhlin, on the podcast. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about John. But before I do, let me just start with welcome to the Way to Wealth podcast, John.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me, Scott. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Excited to have you, excited to jam and just share you with my audience in case they don't know you. I actually was introduced to John years ago from Vern Harnish, and I don't even remember. It might have been 7 years ago. It's been a while. At one of Vern's conferences, and John was on the main stage, presented on this premise of giftology, and he gave his background. And I'm like, this is on point. This is meaningful, and I don't know. It feels like the right thing to do. Also, just building relationships. So before we jump into more of our work together, John, I'll give a little backstory growing up. Which I can relate to this, but as a farm boy in Ohio, then ended up being the greatest seller in Cutco's 68-year history. How's that happen? Well, I'm going to let John tell his story. So what I will say is just great human being. We've become friends through multiple acquaintances through the years, and just up some really cool stuff. And so, John, if you would, let's just start by sharing a little bit about this backstory of coming from a farm boy in Ohio to becoming the greatest seller in Cutco's history.
Yeah, well, I think that like a lot of successful people, you grow up with nothing. It makes you hungry and motivated to go not be poor anymore. And so that was really my story in Ohio. 47 acres, 1 acre garden, heat our house with wood, and probably a lot of your audience, I guess, is it's a lot of leaders, type A men and women that are doers. Like, they're conquerors, they're hunters, they've grown businesses and are entrepreneurs. And a lot of them probably don't give two rips about gifts. Like, what? Like, really? Why did Scott bring this gift guy on? Like, who cares? Like, that's the thing we do at Christmas, right? That's the thing you do at 5-year anniversaries or 25. But like that, why is that relevant to a business leader or a person that's successful? And so if you're like, I don't care about gifts, I don't either. And I own a gifting agency that does it for leaders. But what most people really care about, what I learned early on from my mentor, Paul, who I learned a lot of this from when I was 20, is every business rises and falls, whether you're a solopreneur or whether you're Google, it rises and falls on relationships with technology providers and programmers, investors, mentors, advisors, employees. Like it's at the end of the day, we're just people, and most businesses scale with humans at some level, and humans respond based upon how you show up for them. If you show up for your wife or your husband or your client, radically generous, over the top in uncommon ways, what do you get? You get deal flow, you get access, you're top of mind, you're liked and trusted, you're engaged with. Like, most people do things very vanilla, very like, what's the least I can get away with? And my mentor, Paul, was the guy who would like find a deal on noodles and buy a semi-load of them and drop 40 grand on noodles for the 200 people he went to church with, not as a tactic, not as I do this, now you have to do something for me. It was just, he invested in human beings and he shifted the whole frame, because a lot of people would drop 10 grand on Super Bowl tickets, or they'd hire an extra 5 employees and add $1 million in overhead to their company. Paul would invest $1 million in the people differently, with love, and we call them heart bombs and artifacts. So the way I became number one at Cutco was, I'm poor, I'm going to go to med school. I see Paul at 60, this rainmaking attorney. And I'm like, I want to be Paul when I'm 60. So I got 40 years to get there. And so I went to him and pitched him knives, which is the most awkward conversation on the planet. Pitch your girlfriend's dad knives. And he changed my life forever, because I thought he'd buy all of his clients that were dudes that were like running insurance firms and financial firms and lumber yards. They're all into hunting and fishing outdoors. So the guy thing to get would be a couple $100 piece pocket knife, hunting knife. And he's like, John, I don't want to wear pocket knives. I want to wear kitchen knives. I'm like, you want to give these CEOs of like $1 million companies like a kitchen tool? Why? And he said, John, the reason I have more referrals, deal flow access, all these things, I found out if you take care of the family and business, everything else takes care of itself. So Cutco's worked within about 7 years, 2 million sales reps. And we started to land million and billion dollar companies using these crazy knives as a way to invest in a relationship. And people are like, man, knives as gifts is weird. I'm like, yeah, that's one of the reasons it works. Even to this day, like Pete Vargas, who's one of the top speakers in the world, works with like Tony Robbins. And he's like, I want to give a gift to Tony. We just did a partnership. I'm like, Pete, we're going to do knives. He's like, shut up. We're not doing knives. And I said, yeah, we are. I said, but it's not going to be the knife that you're thinking. I said, we're going to send him a $10,000 gift. And he's like, 10 grand for knives? I said, well, we're going to take the biggest set Cutco makes. There's 40 knives. We're going to take 80 of Tony and Sage's quotes at Tony's wife, Sage, 40 years spoken into existence. And it's going to go in this strong box of the video from you talking about legacy. And 7 generations from now, your great grandkids are going to be using these tools and being reminded of the legacy that you guys started today and the millions of people that have been impacted, including myself. Now, when that landed, Sage called Pete crying, not because they couldn't afford the knives. Anybody could go, they could buy 10,000 knife sets. What I learned from Paul early on was the physical item was the delivery vehicle for this emotion. It says, I see you and I understand that you have a spouse. I understand you have a family. I understand you have a legacy. I understand you care about, your inner circle, which is you invite over and break bread with them in everybody's kitchen, whether you're in Idaho or Africa. And so the core of really my message is very simple. I'm a farm kid. Like, I only do things if it works, like very simply, but if you invest in relationships radically and shift the whole frame of how people are used to getting things. And all of a sudden, we started to land pro sports teams as clients and stupid stuff that a farm kid that was milking goats just does not deserve to be in those circles. But it happened because of what I learned, that kind of really, a lot of it's biblical wisdom that goes back, 10,000 years. So I didn't invent anything. The reason I sold so many knives, not because I'm a great salesperson, it was because we started to understand how to use those tools to connect with people.
Yeah, that's amazing. There's so many roads I can go down with that opening conversations. I'm just going to pick a couple yet. So the frame of this podcast is the way to wealth, where there's 4 pieces to it as an infant entrepreneur. It's the healthy, wealthy, wise, and happy, the I, individual level. It's the we, the family, legato family. So how do we work on healing ourselves and be whole, complete human beings? And then in the family piece, how do we have harmony there and core values that are clear there? Then we go to the business, the 4 Ps of a sustainable business: purpose, people, process, and profit. Then we get to the money, which is this podcast, The Way to Wealth, to make the money clean. So the money's aligned with who we are as a person, who we are as a family, and who we are as a business. She said several things there. And one of them is, I want to go down this path a little bit. You talked about this mentor, Paul. And I think I want to dig there just a little bit, because it's gosh, the key definitely seems to, and Tony Robbins talks about this. If you want to get something, find someone who has it and then learn how they did it. That's the fast track. And I agree with that. And when I think about this, you also said relationship capital. And I think originally how we met was Vern, of course, and then mutual friend Garrett Gunderson and Rich Christensen. And Rich, you talk about relationship capital. This guy just has phenomenal relationships because he shows up with no agenda and really cares about building that relationship and helping that person. And this isn't for a month. This is decade type relationships, and that's why they're so deep for him. And it might've been Garrett who said, what's financial capital? Financial capital is relationship capital multiplied by intellectual capital will equal your financial capital. And I don't know here's the cool thing. I like to do my best to, attribute whoever this stuff comes from, but it ultimately comes from creator, or, you know what I mean? It just comes from not even us. So it's I don't want to take ownership. That's it. Ancient wisdom. And that's my jam is. So you mentioned this 7th generation with Tony Robbins. Well, what I didn't talk to you about, maybe you already know this, but the legato piece with Rich, these are the family values. I bring the structure. Well, I call the structure 7th generation families. Why? Because I learned it through my Native American friends. So I'm chairman of a board of 4 Worlds Global Impact Fund with Chief Phil Lane Jr. And I learned that it's indigenous wisdom. They never made a decision without thinking 7th generation. So how's this going to affect 7 generations from now? So all that said, lots of places we can go down. I'd love to dig a little more with Paul. Is he still living? And if so, or if not, would like to know. And then just more about him and what you learned from him and some wisdom that he was able to instill in you.
Yeah. He's still living. He's up there in age now. I mean, I've been doing this, we've had the agency and speaking, consulting, helping companies, the done for you service for 22 years. So Cutco kind of rolled into starting a business, giving up med school, that stuff. And unfortunately, the relationship with his daughter didn't work out. That crashed and burned. That's all. That could be a whole nother podcast. But they're a wonderful family. She's married, kids. I'm married. I got 4 daughters. Everything's happily ever after. But I've learned from Paul, just watching him. You talked about it's sexy to talk about the long game, right? Vaynerchuk and all these different influencers. The long game is decades, not days. I saw that in Paul, where he would show up for relationships. And it didn't make math sense on the front end. The time he spent, the gifts he gave, a lot of people spend time and do experiences, invest a lot of resources, but sending physical gifts is unusual in business because it's just not most people's skill set. They think it's weird or uncomfortable or they don't look silly. But Paul would reap the 100x, the 1,000x return. We call it return on relationship, ROR. Versus ROI. Everybody wants to measure ROI, but usually ROR will take out Facebook ads and every other thing that we do marketing wise. It comes down to people. And so Paul would invest in a relationship, and I saw it come back 20 years later where did something for somebody, opened a door, not manipulative. It was just an investment. And magically that person inherited real estate from their great grandfather or whatever. And then who'd they call? Who's the first person they called? The most liked, trusted, and top of mind person. And Paul was that in the community because he didn't just show up. It's like Harvey Mackay's dig your well before you're thirsty. Everybody would be like, oh, I'll invest $1 million in relationships if I know tomorrow I'm going to get $5 million. But that's not how business tends to work. Even when you're investing in manufacturing, equipment or whatever else, you're like, hey, what's the payoff? Is it 24 months? Is it 72 months? There's a time period of pouring into people. And Paul just did it. He wrote 10 handwritten notes a day. See an article, think about somebody and so a lot of the things we do, I realized the note itself, if you give a Rolex to somebody or something expensive, but there's no meaning and context, it's just, you just threw money at the problem. People do that all the time in business. I'll just give them a bonus. Does that work? Well, money's cool, but at some point, people are searching for appreciation and gratitude and meaning, which sound woo-woo, but I saw Paul pour into those relationships. And a lot of times what he wrote down was just as meaningful as a check. They didn't need money necessarily, but they loved to know that Paul was in their corner. And so I realized anything that we do has to have a handwritten note, has to have a video, has to have something that connects people to that heart level. Otherwise it's just stroking checks. And so many in business do that. And that's not how you deepen relationships. It's just, cutting checks. It has to be thoughtful. People are like, well, John, it's the thought that counts. I gave gift cards to all my employees. I'm like, would you ever tell your wife that? Would you ever say, oh, honey, here's a piece of plastic, go buy your own gift? Probably not. If you did, it wouldn't resonate. Why? It's the thoughtful thought that counts. And I saw that in Paul. It was connecting the dots and doing the extra effort. And so Paul was like an MBA program in emotional intelligence and connecting and biz dev and playing the long game and all of these different things. And I got to be, I had a front row seat for 3 years. And he took me under his wing. And I've tried in the book, Giftology, all these things, to give him credit. He's like, John, I didn't do anything. I just cracked the door for you. I'm like, Paul, you believed in me and gave me your social capital to go, stand up on, and gave me confidence. I could go on and on about the things I learned just from him alone.
That's amazing. Thank you. Because to me, there's just so much juice in that and so much wisdom in having a mentor. And so I wanted to dig a little deeper, and you did it. So thanks for sharing that. And it makes me think, just putting some of this together, is that I talked about the frame as health, wealth, wisdom, and happiness. So if we just go, and there's 3 things under each one. So for wealth, people come to, this is the Way to Wealth podcast. What are we about? Helping people have economic independence, financial freedom, right? And that's where that's their entry point. Well, the Way to Wealth clearly helps with that. And I like to say, look, what if I told you the Way to Wealth within 12 months is going to create and make you a billionaire? would you want it? And of course, the answer is always going to be, yeah. And you're going to have miserable relationships, questionable health, and feel completely unfulfilled. You still want it? The answer is absolutely not. So you don't want the $1 billion. You want what you think the energy and what the $1 billion will provide. So the point on wealth is, yes, financial freedom is important. Let's create income passively, ideally greater than your experiences or expenses, so you can swing for the fences and do these things. What you really want in wealth is the second level, which is, I got enough. All right, that piece, I could check that box. I got enough. Because I know billionaires who are not wealthy, and I know people with very little money that are super wealthy because they have enough. And then the third level down, which is the ultimate in my mind in wealth, is love. And, you said this, it may sound woo. It's not woo, it's true. Woo is true. So I call it, what's the ultimate human need is to be seen and loved. And that's part of the purpose to me of when I heard this and it resonated with me is you're giving people the opportunity to be seen and loved via these gifts, which is the ultimate human need.
Yep. It is. I mean, 5 Love Languages book, the founder of that book, Gary Chapman, it sold 22 million copies. There's 5 different love languages. It's all love though. Like, whether it's words of affirmation, speaking it, writing it down, handwritten note, like quality time, like you give the gift in person. Like people are like, I'm not a good gift giver. Gifting's not my love language. I'm like, but you want to be loved in your relationships. You want more referrals. It comes from loving people and for them feeling, loved and seen, top of mind, all of those things, trusted. Like, I think people, just don't realize what they're communicating when they do. Like, nobody's taking their clients out to McDonald's. Like, if they do an experience or a dinner or golf, or whatever else, nobody's going to going to the municipal city golf course. Like, they're taking people to Pebble Beach. Like, people do all of this stuff at a level 10. And then over here, it's like, hey, here's a polo shirt with my logo on it for $50. Thank you so much for the $1 million in business. Like, what does that communicate? You don't matter. You're a number. I didn't think about you. I didn't care. I pulled something out of the closet. Like, you're basically saying you don't matter. I don't see you. Like, go be an advertisement for me, which is be a manipulation like that. So people don't realize that in these higher level relationships, whether it's with employees, like the amount of employers that are like, hey, here's a catalog of crap from China with my logo on it. That's what you get for working 5 years, 10,000 hours for my company. Talk about spending money to make somebody feel like about that big. But nobody's ever thought like, oh my gosh, I want to belittle my relationships. But that's what they do. So all of these things like tie back to very simple principles: being seen, being loved, being heard, being understood, being cared about, feeling like somebody's in your corner. Like, all of that is very simple. It's where people, when they have dozens of relationships or hundreds of relationships or thousands of relationships, our natural tendency is to cut corners because we're overwhelmed. And we don't think strategically. We think, well, I have good intent, but the intent isn't landing. So you're actually like, not that you don't have to spend more money. It's just looking at your business or your relationships holistically and saying, hey, how do I show up differently and make sure that my intention lands, so that, that person, when they're having dinner with the client, or they're at the golf course, or they're at the board meeting, they're going out of their way to want to see you win, because there's that deep emotional connection. You're the first person that they think about when they hear a problem or a challenge or any of those things. So not rocket science, but the execution is so difficult because humans are so complicated and we don't have a plan on how to do this. We have operations plans, workout plans, eating plans. Like, somebody what their relationship plan is for all of their key relationships. And they're like, they look at you like a deer in headlights. They've never thought about it at all.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point and valid point. 2 things. One is, I think I'm going to coin this woo is true, because I wrote that down when I said that might, someone may already have, but anyway, I like
it. It rolls off the tongue.
Exactly. So you mentioned execution, and it makes me think like all this resonates. And if people are listening, I don't know how it wouldn't resonate. I think one thing that might come up, John, is, it does make sense. However, I'm just trying to keep my freaking head above water. And I mean, that doesn't just mean financially, because maybe the company's doing great financially. It's just busy. It's like, oh my gosh, it's like I got 50 team members and we got this happening. It's like, I just am trying to keep the wheels from coming off. So if someone's thinking that, which is to me, why you created Giftology is to be an execution potential component to actually deliver this. I'd love to learn more about what, if someone's out there going, gosh, this is great. I can't do it. How does Giftology work, and what might that look like for them?
Yeah. So I would say that, like anything, you need the recipe. Like if you're going to go make lobster bisque, you need the lobster bisque recipe. If you're going to make bread, you need the bread recipe. And the recipe is not challenging. It's not, if you have one relationship to take care of, let's say it's your spouse, people will reach out. I spoke at Top of the Table, big life insurance event. Bunch of guys like, man, my 50th anniversary is coming up. I need your help. I'm like, no, you don't. You need to read the book. You need to understand the recipe. You need to listen for the next 6 months to your wife or your husband. Most of the time it was dudes that were taking care of their wife. And I said, anybody, a farm kid that was goat milking can do this, anybody. And my love language isn't gifting, by the way. I've been intentional and thoughtful, and reason I'm world-class at this is the bar. People think they're a 7 out of 10 in this, and they're really a -3. The bar is low. Even with your spouses, like a lot of times people are like, dude, like if you just listen and read the book and make the gift all about them, not about you, no logos, no how cool am I, make it all about them. So if you have one person, go read the book and go download giftologyplan.com. That walks through, like, it's not the what, it's who you're taking care of. Is it your wife? Is it your client, your mentor, your advisor? You were just out in Utah, like one of the guys I learned taking care of vendors, same level most people do clients, was OC Tanner, $800 million company. They buy more Rolexes than anybody in the US. When Rolex comes to town, who picks up the tab? They do. Why? Because they don't have a business without their vendors. That's what they taught me. So when I buy millions of dollars of knives, still from Cutco, I send the president, owner, the staff that's engraving it. I hit them with heart bombs all the time. Why? Because I want them when the back's against the wall, when I need them to run an extra run or pull we all need our vendors to be in our corner, and we don't realize it. We try to nickel and dime them. I do the exact opposite. So downloading the blueprint, though, and understanding how to take care of those people and how much should you be budgeting. You can steal our whole playbook and go do this on your own if you have a few people. Now, the challenge and the reason our agency exists on the strategy and the logistics is if you have 20 relationships that are all worth, even employees, if you had to replace a $100,000 employee, it might cost you $500,000 cost to your company based upon them taking clients and replacing them, whatever else. So if you start to understand metrics and you say, hey, I got 20 employees, I got 30 vendors, I got 25 key centers of influence. Now, all of a sudden, you got even a small company, if they're honest, they have 100 relationships that matter. And that's where people start saying, well, do I have to handwrite the note? Do I have to personalize it with their name? I don't know what their spouse's name is. Why am I sending something to their assistant? Now it becomes too much. And so that's where people hit the easy button. Let's just do Amazon gift cards. Let's just send cash. Let's just give jackets with our logo on it. Let's just whatever. And so our firm, the focus is to, when we onboard a client, we help them segment their relationships. We help them understand the value of those relationships and reframe and say, hey, you spent $2 million last year on marketing. What did that really pay off? What if you spent 25% of that on the relationships that even got you to the dance? And what if all of your clients just sent you one more referral a year? What would that be worth? What if they sent you 10 referrals? I have some guys, the way I got into Vern's stage was Cameron Harold, who you probably know. He's investing $25,000 in that relationship. The first one was, we bought the $7,000 at Brooks Brothers clothes and outfitted his hotel room to look like a Brooks Brothers store. That was the first time I spent time with him. I didn't ask him for anything. I just wanted him to mentor me, hopefully. But I invested 25 grand over 10 years. People like 25 grand in one relationship. I'm like, you need to reframe everything. If you hired one good assistant for a year, you're going to pay at least 50 grand. I got Cameron as a sales rep for my brand, actively advocating to all of his CEO clients for half the cost of an assistant for a decade. 25 grand is a rounding error. It's not even so when we lay a plan out and people are all of a sudden like, oh my gosh, investing $250,000 in these relationships is a lot to, we really probably should be investing $500,000, or instead of 50 grand, we really should be doing 100 grand. But that part of doing the heavy lifting and saying, what's the recipe? What's the blueprint? Who are the people? If they all went away, what would that cost my company over the next 10 years? And then all of a sudden people are like, dang, I thought my $5,000 of peanut brittle at Christmas was a big budget. Now, all of a sudden, they're adding a 0, 2, or 3 and realizing, wow, like if I got all of my clients and all of my employees, like the key question I would ask any business owner is if your employees and your clients aren't actively selling for you, aren't actively going out of their way to bring you up and recruit their family and friends to the table, you don't have loyalty, you have passive loyalty. You have somebody, if they say, who's your guy that does plumbing? Who's your guy that does insurance? Somebody else has to ask and instill and pull that information out of somebody. Cameron and my clients, my best clients that I've invested into, are listening for, man, I'm having an issue with referrals. I'm having an issue with appreciating my employees. I'm having an issue keeping and retaining my best clients. I'm having an issue attracting the best talent to my dealer pool. They're listening, and then they're like saying, I have the solution. You need to talk to Ruhlin at Giftology. And those 5 words or 10 words is the only sales pitch they need because they went out of their way to sell on my behalf. And when you have people like that selling on your behalf, then all of a sudden, anything that you're investing with us is a rounding error relative to the value that it's producing, not in the woo, but the actual true bottom line of like, holy crap, we landed 10 more referrals last year that produced $1.5 million. I'll gladly send John and his team, for stupid knives and mugs and whatever he's selling. I don't care if it's ice. Like if it produces another 20 referrals for us, like we're going to keep doing that, rinse and repeat. And so our best clients we had for 17, 18, 19 years doing this, because it's not really about the stupid gift. It's about how do you grow revenue through relationships.
Powerful. And let's not forget the woo is true. So here's what I heard. And this resonates highly with me. And so I anticipated it definitely is going to be with the audience. So like 3 things. Look, you can do it on your own. You start with reading the book and listen, which by the way, is one of our big teaching things. It's like in our industry, the starting point of what's missing is listening, getting to the bottom of the iceberg. Typically we hear 30% of the conversation and launch to solutions. The real secret is the last 5%. Knowing that, the solutions take care of themselves. So read the book, listen. Number 2, giftologyplan.com. That's the blueprint. If someone wanted to implement it, take it, do it, read the book, listen, go to giftologyplan.com. Someone on your team, if you have a team, can possibly help you implement it. Then it may get to the point where size and scale gets to the point where it's just not quite manageable. If you're not doing this as a company full time, that's when someone would reach out to Giftology directly to say, hey, can you guys help us manage this?
Yeah. How do we scale our thoughtfulness? We got these 15 relationships and we're just not getting around to it. Or, like we send the same swag, we're doing the same conferences, we're doing the same golf, the hunting trips, and all of those are cool. But I liken it to if you show up for your wife or your husband on Valentine's Day, anniversary, birthday, do you earn brownie points? No, those are table stakes times.
Yep.
And so the dinners out at Morton's, the, flying on planes and, doing the dog and pony show at conferences. Those are all cool. FaceTime is great, but it doesn't scale very well. And your competitors are all doing the same thing, right? They're all like when you recruit somebody, and that's why like one of the things that we do, for our employees, we have a line of people waiting to work for Giftology. Why? Well, before they even start, I send a gift that's nicer than most people get at their 20-year anniversary before they've even started to them and their spouse. Be like, John, why are you dropping $1,000 on gifts, but they haven't even started working? I'm like, are you dumb? Like you hired that entry-level person for 45 to 55 grand. That's a $10,000 delta that you didn't think anything of. And then you're going to do 401k, and then you're going to do health insurance. You just dropped another $20,000. $1,000 to make somebody feel welcome when they start with your company is a lot. Are you insane right now? But when you challenge the frame, they're like, yeah, gosh, you're right. We pay to all of our employees. Most of them have been remote way before COVID. We pay to have their houses cleaned every other week. It's costs $3,000 to $4,000 an employee per year. Like, how do you afford that? And we spoke of Google. I'm like, once again, $3 or $4 grand to have somebody get 4 or 5 hours of their life back with their hobbies and their family and their kids, and they don't feel guilty. If you gave them the stipend, they would never invest it in house cleaning. So what we're talking about at any level, any industry, 2 employees, 20,000 is really just getting back to like thinking like an entrepreneur, which is I have a limited pool of dollars. Most are not publicly traded companies with just this unlimited budget. How do I spend $1 and get $10 back out? That's all we're talking. We're not talking about gifts. We're talking about in relationships, you have to be creative with that dollar investment. And if you are, and you come at it from a completely different angle as an entrepreneur, we all want that lever point. This is that little hinge that can swing the big door. So if you talk to your team, you're like, they think that you're insane. Like, you want to do what with gifts? Like, no, I want to think like an entrepreneur and think differently about how I invest in relationships. This just happens to be a tool that most people are horrible at, that they suck so bad at, that this blue ocean that gives them an opportunity to show up in an uncommon way. And gifting happens to be that delivery vehicle. So that would be, take back to the team as you're looking through the website and looking through the book. That's why our next book probably won't have gifting in the subject line, because I want people to understand this is a relationship conversation more than anything.
Yeah. Reframe, rename, reclaim. Makes complete sense. Makes complete sense. Let me ask you this, John. Yeah, take it. So let me ask you this, as far as, maybe final thoughts that you would want to share with the audience, and then next steps. How do they reach out to you? Yeah, we just gave 3, read the book, listen to giftologyplan.com. 3, how would they reach out directly? So 2 things. Anything I didn't ask you that you think would be meaningful to share with the audience? And then how would people best connect with you and learn more and or reach out to Giftology?
Yeah. I would say that, a lot of this comes down to some of the simple, like blocking and tackling. And one of those things is, the business leaders that crush it for decades tend to be those that are like build the long-term relationships and they're grateful. And if you take, I challenge people all the time, like, you don't have to have this crazy master plan, but if you just take the next 30 days and write down 3 people that you're grateful for that have got you to where you're at in business: mentors, advisors, investors, employees, past clients. You do that for a month, that's 100 people. You do that for a year, it's 1,000 people. And so I would just challenge people to start like writing down and start feeling that emotion of gratitude. And it doesn't just have to be like crazy knife sets and, artifact mugs that are thousands of dollars. Like, sometimes it's just taking the time to write a really thoughtful handwritten note to somebody, or sending somebody a video, or, gift could be opening a door and referring business, or going out of your way to give a testimonial and send business to a partner of yours. Like, we focus on the physical because it scales and because it's unique and different, but in general, the core message is gratitude. And I would just say that, we've known each other for a number of years, and a lot of the things that people are like, they get fixated on the what of like, what should I give? And like people are like, John, what's the best and the worst gift that you've ever seen? And I'm like, used to be the worst was like these most people give out mugs or water bottles or backpacks or whatever else. I'm like, that's the worst. And people put their logo on it. You can only drink out of 1 mug. And then this artist made one for me, and it's cost a few $1,000s. And at the time, they reached out blindly and said, "Hey, John, I want to bless your wife. We answer these 5 questions." And then I had no idea what he's going to do. I answered them. I'm like, the guy's using my playbook against me. So I answered the questions. And long story short is he hand delivered them to me. And it was in this crate. It looked like there was claw marks. I'm like, is he delivering an animal? Like, what's going on here? And he's like, "Hey, I'm a gift maker. And I feel like God's called me to be a gift maker, blah, blah, blah." And he pulled out 2 mugs. So you're talking $2,000, $3,000 each. Carved into them is my life story on the farm with my dad or whatever else. My wife's on her farm with her dad who passed away of cancer. It was like basically like faith, family, core values, legacy, you name it, all in a functional piece of art. I'm crying immediately. And then he had a vase of our life story together, my wife and I's, and then another vase, $5,000 of every Bible verse, Old and New Testament, talked about generosity and giving. And so I've now like started giving these out to like Tim Tebow. We just gave one to on stage. Tim received a lot of gifts. He was crying when he got it. Why? The clay itself is worth $20, but the story and the meaning that was put into that piece that he'll now be reminded of our relationship and the relationship that gave it to him every time as he drinks his coffee and tea. So a lot of the things that we're talking about are very unsexy things, but what makes them sexy is the meaning, the thoughtfulness, the story, the energy, the effort. It takes 4 weeks to make one of these pieces. So what I'd say is, as you think through, whether it's for your spouse or your parents or whatever else, like, yeah, you don't want to go cheap. Nobody needs another second best thing. But don't just write a check. I inspire people to take time to slow down a little bit and be really thoughtful and really meaningful. Because if you do this well, like we've had celebrities reach out and say, John, if my house is on fire and I got a big house, outside of my kids, I'm grabbing the mug because of the story and the meaning. My $50,000 watch, insurance will cover that. Nothing's going to cover this because of the story and the meaning behind it. And so when you can start to think at that level of depth that's why we call them artifacts, like, man, special things, relationships start to flourish when you're able to show up in that powerful way. And we all at the end of the day want that connection. We want to thrive and flourish, but take the time to write the people down that you're grateful for, and then go all in on those relationships and come back to me in 3 years, do this all in, don't hold back, no 5%, and tell me it wasn't worth it, that it didn't pay off in spades in every way possible. Never had anybody come back and say that.
Amazing advice. The health, wealth, wisdom, and happiness piece, John, is the happiness is basically number one is grateful, and I do it every morning in my meditation. When I end, it's 3 things I'm grateful for, 3 people I'm grateful for. That's part of happiness. And then second is having a dream or purpose that we're contributing to each day, this North Star guiding why we're here, piece. And then third is relationships. Healthy relationships is the game of happiness. This is my frame anyway. And so certainly gratitude's a part. So resonated with this at so many levels. I knew I would. That's why I had you on, because we know, as you said, known each other for years. And so knew I would resonate with the message, which that means the audience will too. So thanks for all the wisdom shared. Hopefully we'll have time to do a round 2 here to dive even deeper. But no doubt I got a lot of value, even learn more. I took notes, so I have some follow-up here. So yeah, man, thanks for being on. And is it giftology.com?
Giftology Group. Giftologygroup.com is our main website.
Beautiful. Giftologygroup.com. So reach out, get his book. Thanks for being on, John, and audience. Catch you back next week. Just remember, woo is true. And we'll catch you back next week on the Way to Wealth podcast, where we're all about making money simple so that you can focus on living life fully today. Catch you next week.
The opinions voiced in Way to Wealth with Scott Ford, Managing Director, Partner, and Wealth Advisor of Carson Wealth, are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Investing involves risk, including possible loss of principal. No strategy assures success or protects against loss. To determine what may be appropriate for you, consult with your attorney, accountant, financial, or tax advisor prior to investing. Guests on Way to Wealth are not affiliated with CWM LLC or Cetera Advisor Networks LLC. Legato Family is not affiliated with Cetera Advisor Networks LLC or CWM LLC. Carson Wealth, 19833 Leitersburg Pike, Suite 1, Hagerstown, Maryland, 21742.